We are back with another episode of our Raj Soin College of Business mini series right here that we're partnering with the College of Business here on WWSU 106.9. I'm Shea Neal. Again, appreciate the College of Business giving me the opportunity to bring you different parts of how, the College of Business and how the business school here at Wright State can benefit both business majors and non-business majors. I'm very excited for today's episode. We're joined to talk a little bit about, personal finance and the finance side of it. Professor Jason Moore, thank you so much for your time. How are you?
I am wonderful. Thank you for having me.
Of course. And I'd love to start off talking a little bit. Tell us a little bit about yourself and a little bit about the role that you have in the College of Business.
Sure. So, the easiest part to start, I think, is I am a WSU alum. For my master's degree, I went here. And as part of that program, I served as a teaching and grad assistant for Professor Marlena Akbari, who was the chair of the finance department. And so, fast forward many, many years later, I'm actually in corporate finance now. So I run a company out of Columbus, and she needed some help with adjuncting. And so 7 years ago, I took the leap and got into the teaching side of it and absolutely love it. And so I teach some of the corporate finance. I recently got into the insurance class, and then, but I think my signature one, and the reason you have me here today is the personal finance class because it's the most popular class. So,
Yeah.
yeah, that's kind of my background.
Very, very cool. And again, we appreciate your time here today. But something that I've always been interested in because, as a senior, I kind of go through this as well. But it's always important to find, getting started with that financial advisor, finding that somebody that you're comfortable with, making that plan and deciding on stuff that you want to, plan for down the road. So do you have any tips or, kind of strategies for capitalizing on that resource, finding, really getting started with a financial advisor?
Sure. So I think first thing I'll say is Wright State actually has a CFP program. So we produce quite a few graduates from the school that are great financial advisors. Many of my former students are now financial advisors. I see them on LinkedIn all the time. So you do have a really good resource sort of in-house that you
Right.
can make contacts with. But in terms of maybe choosing the right one or looking for that area, I think there's two things that I would say. The first is that you need to take a class like 2050 that where you're going to learn the basics of finance for yourself, because one of the things you need to know is what you don't know, right? So you don't go to the doctor and just go, what's wrong with me?
Mhm.
You go in with something specific that you're looking
Right.
for some more information on. So the same thing happens with a financial advisor. If you are really, really comfortable understanding how to do a budget, and you're like, yeah, I kind of get my insurances. I'm comfortable buying my auto insurance, et cetera, but I don't really understand how to do this 401k, or I don't understand the annuities or whatever it is, then you can go with a specific question for that person and help them kind of at least hone in on the areas that you have a little bit of concern with. So I think that's the first piece. The second part is very similar to something like when you're looking for a medical professional. We if somebody has their CFP as a financial advisor, the state or the powers that be, if you will, people
Mhm.
smarter than you and I, have declared that those people have the technical skill. What you're really looking for is a personality fit,
Yeah.
right? When you go to your doctor, if you go to a dentist, for example, like you assume they're a dentist, they know how to work on your teeth. What you're looking for is the person that you can, talk to and that you're comfortable with, who can give you, make you feel comfortable in the chair, that kind of thing. Well, it's very similar with the financial advisor. You want somebody who can listen to you, who makes you feel comfortable, because you're going to be talking a lot about a lot of personal information, right? A lot, and on occasion, some uncomfortable stuff. If you
Mhm.
have a lot of debt, or you're not sure how to make the bills that month, or whatever it is, and you're looking for advice, it's not always the most comfortable circumstance,
Right.
and so you want somebody that kind of personality wise jives with you. And I think that really becomes, as they become a bigger part of your life, they'll become, I'll stop short of saying friend, but they will become someone that you're really close with, and so you want it to be somebody you get along well with. I think that's a really key part that people forget.
Absolutely. And I think that it's good to have, obviously, the most important thing with a situation like that is trust.
Sure.
And so I think that makes a lot of sense. But something that really interests me that you mentioned is financial success is about processes.
Sure.
And I'm curious kind of if you can elaborate on that and, what are some of those examples of those processes that really, that you mentioned is all the key to financial success?
Yeah. So I think there's there's two ways I look at process for my students, and two things that I specifically try to make sure they learn throughout the course of the class. So the first one is that no matter the size of the decision, the purchase, that's just dollars on a page. That's just more zeros. And so let's just say, for example, that you as a senior in college are looking at buying a new car,
Hmm.
and you have certain criteria. So you're looking at, how many, do I want 2 or 4 doors? How many do I want 4-wheel drive? Do I want a car, an SUV? How much gas mileage do I want to get? Et cetera, et cetera. All the features, all that kind of stuff. And you decide after making all those things, you look and you say, okay, I can afford $5,000 for this car.
Hmm.
Well, when I go to look for a new car as a older person with a career, right? I have the exact same decisions, the exact same criteria, the exact same process I have to go through. It's just that my car's 50,000.
Hmm.
So, but that doesn't actually matter, right? That's just imaginary numbers on a page. And
Right.
so, it's important for people to understand that the process of all financial decisions, regardless of your stage of life, the process is the same.
Hmm.
It's just the end result that ends up being bigger as you get older, if you will. And so we want to make sure that you'll never make a good decision on that $50,000 car if you didn't know how to make good decisions on the $5,000 car. So that's the first piece. And then the second part of process is consistency. So just like anything else in your life, it's very hard to build a solid financial foundation if you aren't doing things on a repetitive basis and doing them consistently and then automating them. So when we talk about process,
Hmm.
it is making as much of your financial life happen without your direct input as you can. So for example, you look at something like a 401k. And the reason that they work so well for people is the money comes out of your paycheck before you ever see it.
Yeah.
Right? So you make one decision at the very beginning, which is, hey, take, 15% of my paycheck. You only have to make that painful decision one time. After that, it's done. If you don't do something like that, if you're trying to pay off a credit card and you say, okay, I'm going to set up automatic payment from my bank account every 2 weeks when I get paid, $100 is going to go towards paying off this credit card or whatever it is. If you don't make those kinds of, if you don't set up those kinds of automated processes, then you're forced to make that painful decision over and over and over and over again. And at some point, you just won't, right? Or you'll slip up here and there. And so
Right.
that's what we mean by getting people set up on processes. So I teach the students how to make better decisions financially, but then also how to activate them and automate them over time in a really consistent manner.
Very, very cool. Now, something that my mom taught me at a very young age is for the money you make, you should, portion a chunk of it to spend, portion a chunk of it to invest, or, put away savings and put a portion away to give back.
Sure.
And something that interests me is, you always hear about how you should attempt to give back a portion of your revenue to a charity or, to something that you care about, something that you're passionate about. So, what are your thoughts on like the best ways to make that happen? Because, like you mentioned, a lot of people are trying to pay off credit cards, pay off cars, stuff like that. So sometimes it's hard to find that little chunk that you can do to give back.
Sure. And I think the common one that I sort of maybe in American culture is easy to think about is the tithe to the church, right? So Judeo-Christian church typically is 10%. So that's the one we think of. Now, I will say that statistically, Americans actually give between 5 and 6% back to charity. But to your point, there is a completely different way to look at this. And so one of the really unique parts I added to the class was this thing we call impact finance. And what we're referring to there is that the other, let's say 90, 95%, whatever is done after the charity part, you still have a really powerful way to make a difference in the world in whatever cause you believe in and by using that money. And so just for examples to sort of flesh it out, I'll start with like sort of maybe the craziest, easiest one ever. Um, you know, if you're somebody who believes in trying to make the environment better, right? An environmentalist,
Right.
which I tend to be myself a little bit. And so, toothpaste tubes, as dumb as that sounds, those are completely trash. You can't recycle them. You can't do anything with them because they're coated plastic. And so they're basically useless for the environment.
Mhm.
Well, there's companies out there that there's one called Hey Humans as an example that sells toothpaste in an aluminum tube that's completely recyclable. And so, is that going to change the world? No. But if everybody did it, it could make a huge difference. And I already have to buy toothpaste,
Mhm.
right? So that's a way to use that other 95% to try to make a positive impact. Um, but it doesn't have to be just the product. It can be the companies. It can so there's many ways to look at how to make a difference in the world. And so, do you yourself have a cause that you're really passionate about?
Right. Yeah. And I think that's something that I love to do is, Something that I really love is high schools that offer TV stations or
Okay.
radio stations
Sure.
to because I'm very passionate about media, as we can see.
Obviously,
But
yeah.
but I never got that opportunity when I was in high school. I really just kind of fell into it. But
Right.
I love getting like Fairmont High School, 15 minutes down the road. I love the fact that they have a radio station where people can experiment with stuff like
Get
that and
trained.
really get going into what I think is a really fun career path.
Yeah, and so, if in that kind of a situation, there's the option to directly give money, right? But that's
Hmm.
the one that everybody sort of like off the top of their head says that could be a little bit of a challenge.
Right.
But perhaps, and I don't happen to know offhand, but maybe there's a product or a company out there that supports arts in the schools, right?
Hmm.
And so you buy their product and they turn around and give, let's say, 15% of their profit to arts in the schools. So it was a product you were already going to have to purchase. And
Right.
so you decided to support, let's say, a better product, right?
Exactly.
And so, I'll give you maybe the best sort of the this example is kind of crazy because when you start checking off boxes of causes that people believe in. So there's a company out of California called Candle Essentials. And so think of, Bath and Body Works style candles, right?
Hmm.
That's really all it is. But they have, they are minority, female, LGBT owned. The owner of the company tries her best to employ women from battered women from local shelters in California as her employees. The product itself is made with coconut wax, which is completely safe for the environment. It's in recyclable glass when when they pour the candle. And the box that it actually comes in is made out of cardboard, but the lid of the box has flower seeds embedded, and you can literally plant the box and it will grow flowers at your house. And so it's like you've got, you're trying to help minorities and females, and you've got, it's good for the environment and it can be recycled. It's like every possible thing. And so you're like, well, if you're going to buy a candle anyways, right? Like as a gift, isn't this a way to do it to make
Right.
the world a little bit better? So that's what we talk about when we go through impact and talk about using money for more than just buying necessities.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think something that COVID has taught us is that the world is constantly changing,
Sure.
and the financial landscape is no exception. So, what are some methods of building credit fast, and some of the most efficient ways to do that? Because I know that a lot of people are like you've hinted at, are looking to make big decisions at this stage of life. Leaving or graduating college or being a college student, maybe looking for that first house, that first car, that first full time stable lifestyle. So, what are some of those ways to, in your opinion, that you can build up some credit and get going in that?
Yeah, so I appreciate the fact that you mentioned credit because it's kind of a dirty word in America, but it's actually really important. And so I guess the sort of exciting thing is that literally this presentation today will be the first time that any of my students have heard me talk about this. So I do teach my students the credit scores and how the math that goes into the algorithm behind the credit score. So a credit score is not a mystery. We do know how it works, and so we know how to, I'll say this politely, manipulate it by doing certain things. And so one of the pieces of advice that has been floating around in the finance world for a long time is the getting one credit card early on as a student,
Mm.
so that you can begin building credit on a consistent basis. However, that obviously comes with the downside possibility and what a lot of parents fear, that you start buying things you can't afford and you get into debt, right? That's the
Right.
fear. And I will say that just statistically for your listeners, the average American household has 9 credit cards with over 25,000 in debt. At 20% interest, that's $5,000 a year in interest. So you're paying over $400 a month on your credit cards without paying them off. So credit card debt is a major problem. And so as a teacher, I've always been sort of hesitant and nervous about recommending that students get credit cards. But now we have this new thing that's come out, and there's a couple of companies out there, and I'll throw out one, just Chime as an example, as a one that's doing this now. It's an online bank, and what they're doing is different. They're issuing you a card that will, for all practical purposes, function like to you as a debit card, just like you're regular from a bank. So let's say you have $500 in your bank account, and you go to Walmart and spend $50.
Mm.
Your debit card would immediately remove it, right? You would see it gone, and you would
Mhm.
show 450 in your bank account. Well, what Chime is doing slightly different, and other companies are doing this as well, is that they are, instead of taking it immediately, they're placing a hold on your account for $50. And maybe the next day, maybe a couple days later, then they remove it.
Yeah.
And the way they're doing it is they're reporting that as they lent you $50 and then you repaid $50. So it looks like a credit card transaction to the credit bureaus and improves your credit score. but there's no risk of overspending because it actually is the money in your bank account. They're not actually lending you any money. They're not giving you open credit.
Mhm.
And so it's a really powerful way that's really kind of brand new. I mean, it's just within the last 6 months, if that, that is available to people to begin building credit early on, but with the safety net of not overspending money you don't actually have. So
Right.
I think it's a really cool tool, and I'm curious to see how well it sort of takes off in the next couple of years. Because again, it's pretty really new actually.
Absolutely. And I know you mentioned earlier on that of course you dabble in the corporate side of finance
Yeah,
as well as the insurance side, which is just as important. But you said and of course your passion and your favorite, your true love for it comes from the personal finance
sure.
side of it. So I'd love to end this off talking about some of the information, some of the tips that students will discover in Finance 2050, and just some of the things that make it a class worth taking in your opinion.
So yeah, I can't recommend the class enough. I mean, I will tell you it's the most popular elective on campus. We usually have a wait list for all of our classes, and because a couple of things. So no matter what teacher you take for it, you're learning the foundational pieces of your life, right? Which I think is what gives it a lot of power. Is that students take all these other classes for their career, but it doesn't have a direct impact to them.
Mhm.
This is the one class that is very much about yours. I mean, we make you pull your credit report and your auto insurance and make you do your budget. It's very student driven. So that part is really cool. What I will say that I guess is a plug, if that's the right way to say it for
Yeah.
myself, if I'm allowed to plug my sections. I do two things that are different than the rest of the professors, and my department chair has sort of given me latitude to make the class really exciting. And so the first part is a lot of finance classes focus on what we would call the defensive side of finance, which is the budgeting side, the saving, the investing, like what you do with the money once you have it. I actually help all of my students go through career based stuff to make sure that they are finding themselves in the right career moving forward because that's where the income comes from, right? So
Yeah.
that's the offensive side. And I do believe there's a lot to that. So I put my students through personality surveys and career surveys and things like that to help them really in their own mind solidify that they're on the right career path because that's how you make a lot of money is being in the right job, right? Is to have passion for what you do and to love what you're doing for a career so you can become really good at it.
Yeah.
So that's the first piece. And then the second part that is very, very unique, and there's very few schools actually in the country doing it, which is what we call financial psychology or behavioral finance.
Yeah.
And this is a focus on teaching students how they think, how their brain actually thinks about money, and it's a lot of things where people don't necessarily recognize it. And so I'll do a couple on you and,
Okay.
and sort of show you. So. If I asked you just in a general sense, do you think that a Tesla Model 3 cost more or less than $60,000?
I would say more.
More, okay. What do you think the price of the Tesla Model 3 is? Give me an exact, I mean, not exact, but pretty close.
I would say 75.
Okay. So the actual price of a new Model 3 is $46,000.
Okay.
But what happens there is a phenomenon we call anchoring. So as soon as I said the number 60,000 to someone who had no affiliation, no understanding of what it should be,
Mhm.
60,000 became the number you worked off of.
Right.
Right. And so do you think your answer would have changed if I would have phrased the initial question as more or less than 50,000? Do you think your actual answer would have still been 75, or do you think you would have brought that answer down?
Maybe 65, 70. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and what's important there is to understand that companies know this,
Mhm.
right? They're manipulating you with this. And that's what, when you see the MSRP on a car, that's why it's there, because they know you're not going to pay MSRP, but you feel like you're negotiating and you got a good deal when it's 4 or 5,000 below MSRP.
Yeah.
Well, what is the MSRP? It's an arbitrary number they picked, right? So they're anchoring you to an imaginary number because they know you'll then negotiate from that imaginary number. And so that's anchoring. So let me try something else with you.
Okay.
I think we still have a little time.
Yeah, we're
Yes?
good.
Okay.
Yep.
So if you went to the Best Buy here in Beaver Creek,
Mhm.
okay, and you wanted to buy a mouse for your computer,
Okay.
and it was, let's say, $50, and the salesman said, "Hey, just so you know, we have an open box, right, one of the sale ones, but it's at the Dayton Best Buy, which is about 20 minutes away." What price would that mouse have to be at the Dayton Best Buy for you to drive down there and pick that one up? What
Let's
do you
say 30 or less.
30 or less. Okay, so you want $20 off. Is that fair?
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's $20 or less, or $20 off, I should say. You'll drive the 20 minutes essentially.
Yeah.
So same scenario, except at this time you're buying a laptop, the full laptop, at the Best Buy in Beaver Creek, and it's $2,000.
Right.
Are you going to drive to Dayton for if the computer is $1,980?
No.
No, right? So again, if you just step back for a quick second, does that actually make sense, right? Like, do my two answers make any sense? It's the same $20, right? So that's what we call transactional utility, which is where we apply an arbitrary value to something based on the situation we find ourselves in. But that shouldn't be the decision factor, right?
Mhm.
You make a certain amount of money as a student here at Wright State. So $20 has a certain value to you. It shouldn't matter how you're saving that $20 or what you're saving it off of or whatever, right?
Right.
And so I think that, so it's, that's a good example of where you have to take a step back and be like, the one that everybody thinks of. When we go to a concert or a sporting event, we just know we're going to end up paying a ton of money for the food and beer and all that kind of stuff,
Parking,
right? Like we
yeah.
just accept it. But why? Like that doesn't make a lot of sense, right? Like
Right.
we know it's overpriced. And so those are transactional utility. The final one I'll give you is just a quick example. So
Okay.
I'm going to ask you so you get money from, let's just say, your job.
Mhm.
What kind of things would you spend that on?
My rent, my cell phone, my streaming services at home, my internet stuff.
Okay, so your bills.
Exactly.
Right? Is that okay? Your monthly bill. So your maintenance. Okay. So the second one is you get money from your tax return. What are you going to spend it on?
I probably try my best not to spend as much of that as possible, but
Okay.
that's more usually when I get that kind of money. It's more like if I had something in mind that I really wanted to
Yeah,
get,
that's
and I
the
have
new
a couple
headphones
extra
or something,
$100,
right? Yeah, or TVs or something. Yeah.
Exactly.
And then the final one is you get a big inheritance from your grandmother passes away and you get a big inheritance. What do you spend it on?
I would say that's definitely more like personal, like putting money towards a new car,
Okay.
putting money something towards like something like that.
Right.
So.
So what you're experiencing right now is what we call mental accounting.
Mhm.
There is, under pure finance rules, there is no logical reason that any of those should be treated differently, right? It's all, you have a budget and a plan that we've established for you, right? That you've put together and you've decided this is what I want to accomplish this year.
Mhm.
Where the money comes from should not change that plan,
Right.
but it does,
Yep.
right? And so, so again, a lot of what I teach the students when we go through this behavioral finance is just recognizing these things, understanding that companies know this for marketing and they're manipulating me, and I need to have tools and I need to just be consciously aware of it so that I can then say, hold on a second, I don't think this is exactly how this is supposed to play out.
Right.
So we spend a lot of time going through and understanding sort of the crazier side of finance too, and where our brains like, we know it should be 2 + 2 should be 4, but somehow I'm getting 7. What's happening here?
Yeah.
And so we work through a little bit of that psychology side, which is just entertaining for the students.
Absolutely, and awesome stuff here today. Again, thank you so much, Professor Jason
Welcome.
Moore, for coming in here talking a little bit about the personal finance side of the Raj Soin College of Business. So we'll have another episode here coming up very shortly. Hope you're enjoying it just as much as I am. But again, thank you to Professor Moore for his time, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.